Both in life and in business, you have to know where you are, where you're going, and how you plan to get there. But you also have to have the data for all those points. You have to do the research. And on this show, I meet with an economist, and we talk all about the data and research, and specifically how it affects our industry. We talk about the pandemic and how it's changed our industry. We talk about housing. We talk about remodeling. We talk about labor and product shortages. So whether you're a homeowner, a professional, someone entering the job force, looking at this industry, this episode has something for you. As together, we are building the future.
This is the Building the Future podcast. I am your host, the lumberjack, Brett Thorne. On this show, we explore topics including construction, building materials, real estate, remodeling, the housing market, industry news, new products and trends, technology, government, everything you need for building the future. Welcome back to the Building the Future podcast. I am your host, Brett Thorne. And tonight I got a special guest with me. Tonight I've got the chief economist for Home Advisor and Angie, which is formerly known as Angies List, Mr. Mischa Fisher. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brett. I love the podcast. Longtime fan, first time caller. I've enjoyed a bunch of them. I'd say I've probably listened to. I'm trying to think. I mean, I listened to 3 today while I was getting a jog in, so that was fun. But it's such, I think, a useful source of information for the industry because so much of the discussion around construction and the building trades, remodeling, home, all things sort of around that tend to really get caught up in just sort of your top line discussion about home sales and what's going on in the mortgage markets. But there's not enough discussion about really what goes on, a layer below that, and sort of the actual people doing the work, the nature of that work, all the complexities involved. There's a reason why people enjoy the work, but also why there's so many different components of it. There's so much complexity. And so I think the broad industry, quote unquote, has needed these forums for more long form, more precise conversations, which I think is really great.
Yeah, and like you said, there's just so much depth to our industry. I mean, there's so many different avenues, so many different components that goes into what we do. It's not bland, it's not at a surface level. There's just layers upon layers of all the different aspects of this industry. So you're spot on right there. And a lot of people, obviously those that are in the industry understand that, but those that are outside maybe don't realize that. And they don't realize, how much depth there is to this.
Yeah, they really do.
So as an economist, that's not something that is traditional, I guess, in our industry. Obviously, it plays a key role. You guys put together a lot of information, a lot of data. So since maybe and actually, I think you're the first economist I've had on the show. So why don't you kind of paint us a picture of, who you are and how you got to where you are?
Sure. Well, that's a great question. And it's true. It's not something that's traditionally associated with the building trades in a way that people sort of think of right off the bat. And, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is you have to have a certain sort of focus on what you're trying to accomplish in order to have there be a need, right? You definitely need lumberjacks. And having grown up on a, small farm in rural Canada, I'm sort of a low rent lumberjack. Certainly falling trees was part of my youthful upbringing. But, you need that. That's a requirement. You need lumber to build things. But you don't necessarily need somebody to tell you what is going to happen with lumber prices next year or what happened with lumber prices in the last year, right? You don't need that as much. And that sort of, I guess, is the beginning of an answer to both those questions, which was, how did I get to where I am now? What's the main focus? The main focus, a lot of people might be familiar with Angie, formerly Angie's List, and the broad scope of it is the company's goal is to be the home for everything home for consumers. So that means that we solve a lot of information problems for consumers, and we try and make their lives easier as homeowners want to tackle everything from just having their sprinklers blown out to seasonal regular maintenance to full-blown expensive remodels and everything in between. We want to be that source of information and service fulfillment for people. And how that fits in for pros can vary a lot, right? I mean, if a pro just wants to use the platform for advertising, they can do that. If they want to use it for leads, they can do that. If they want to do it to just have jobs booked for them, they can do that. So the platforms provides all that functionality. My role at the company is to actually try and contribute to the broader sort of marketplace of ideas around the industry, and to figure out and then make public what's going on with consumers, what's going on in the skilled trades, what's going on with housing, remodeling, the mortgage markets, all these things that sort of overall shape what's driving demand for the industry, demand for these services. Why are things booming right now? Can we expect that to continue? What can we do to get more people into the trades? How are consumers changing their preferences? All of those sorts of things that can really sort of shape what both the short-term and the long-term trajectory of the industry is. And, I came to it via a somewhat circuitous route. But before this, I was the chief economist for the state of Illinois. So for any listeners that are Illinois taxpayers, I apologize. I did my best to lower your tax burden, but I'm not sure my batting average was particularly wonderful. So I'm going to just apologize to that subset of listeners. But certainly we did our best to try and put some rationality into that system. And then before that, I spent some time working for Congress, also trying to make policy a little more rational. So there, I can apologize to all listeners in the United States for the
We've got that knocked out. Well done, sir.
we got that. So we covered both Illinois and the entire country in terms of what's going on. But
we've either got a lot of sympathy or we've lost everybody at this point.
Yes, probably more likely the latter than the former. But so certainly, my focus has been on infrastructure, and federally it was infrastructure and those sorts of forms of investment, and understanding the policy levers around that. But my background, my educational background's in economics and applied statistics, and so I also moonlight as a statistics instructor at Northwestern University. In addition to this, just sort of focusing on how you can use quantitative tools to answer empirical questions, and that's what I do for Angie. So the most recent research we put out was looking at the home service market and what's driving the market right now. So we really identify what's going on with consumers and what's going on with the housing stock, because it's the combination of the two that really shapes demand for not only new home construction, which of course gets a lot of the top line attention, but also the maintenance and sustaining of the existing housing stock. We tend to think a lot about housing construction, and this year will probably be a little over 1 million single family homes built, which is a lot, and it sounds like a lot, and it requires a lot of materials and a lot of labor to build that. But what people forget is there's 140 million existing housing units out there that are all constantly degrading and falling apart and being beat up by the elements, or the people who live inside are changing their minds about what sort of layout they want, or their materials, their stylistic preferences. And so all of these things at that scale is what really shapes how the market evolves. So we put out research on that, but the next thing we're putting out is going to be on the skilled trades. So in early September, we'll have some research coming out on the skilled trades, and it's sort of our annual look at the ages of tradespeople, what they're earning, where they're located, what their concerns are, and how they're recruiting, and all of these things. And so we really try and hit everything in the marketplace.
To maybe kind of tie it together here a little bit, put a nice bow on it. Let's just start with just Angie, formerly known as Angies List. Also now in Home Advisor, you guys are all the same company now. There was a merger a few years ago. Is that kind of, did I remember hearing that correctly?
Yeah, 2017 there was a merger. Yeah.
Okay. And so basically, to kind of give just a quick definition or description of that, could we say that Angie is a hinge pin between the end user, the homeowner, and the professional for home services?
Yeah, I think that would be a fair characterization in terms of the functionality in the marketplace. And sometimes people are curious about what's the purpose of a middleman in that sense. And I would say that there's a lot of problems being solved. So it's not just a sort of a strict middleman. It's also there's added functionality. But the big thing is that in order to make a market really function efficiently, everybody has to be on the same playing field in terms of information and knowledge and incentives. And so having a central sort of marketplace for that can really help solve a lot of those pain points for both consumers and for professionals.
Okay. And the organization itself, it started mid 90s. Is that correct? So we're looking at pretty much a 25-year window, maybe just a little bit over.
Yeah. Quite a long time. I mean, by
Okay.
modern standards.
Yeah, no kidding. So, what is the marketplace? And then kind of tell us a little about the size of it, a typical professional customer, and then a typical homeowner customer.
Sure. So the typical professional customer is going to vary. It's, you're going to have some sole props, some people who are not incorporated and just doing, some work that they sort of do on the side. You're also going to have people who are running, big multi-person remodeling and construction firms. So you really run the gamut there in terms of that. The company itself also covers a wide range of services, right? Everything, again, from new home construction to seasonal cleaning or seasonal upkeep and home cleaning, that sort of thing. So we're talking about jobs that are $60 and jobs that could be $2 million, right? So it really varies quite a lot in terms of the pro that's going on there to use it. And the reason why is because there's such a diversity of consumers out there, right? I mean, people, Americans live in every possible configuration out there. People live in, big sprawling mansions in Beverly Hills. They live in, small tiny houses in, rural Kentucky. They live everywhere. And, somebody might live on a sailboat. Somebody might live in, northern Alaska. So we live in a wide variety of places. And when people have needs to adjust their housing structure in some way, whether it's just protecting it, so the regular sort of upkeep and maintenance, like I was mentioning earlier about landscaping and cleaning, turning your sprinklers on in the spring and turning them off in the winter, or some homeowners don't know how to necessarily change their HVAC filter, right? So there's a market demand for that. But then there's also the market demand for bathroom remodels are quite popular, so they've been booming as a result of the pandemic. So there's a lot of consumers coming on there for that. And the overall market is all of those things. You put all those things together, you've got the full market. And the overall size in our 2021 estimate is about $595 billion in consumer spending this year. And that's about a 17% growth year over year. So pretty sizable. But when people look at the price of OSB going up 400%, it seems pretty reasonable in that context. OSB is obviously just one piece of it, but you're talking about plumbing fixtures, lighting, garage doors, steel joists. I mean, everything shot up in price. So overall 17% growth when you factor in the price increases plus the increased consumer propensity to consume. We put out research in the late fall of last year looking at how COVID impacted people's actual household budgets. And we found 52% of households took some of their restaurant budget and put it right into their homes, right? So it wasn't, they consciously did that. It wasn't just that it happened, but they consciously said, hey, I was going to spend $4,000 on restaurants this year. Instead, I'm going to put that on my home. We found 48% did the same thing with vacation budgets, and about 33% did it with their commuting budget, right? So collectively, you're talking, for the average household, thousands and thousands of dollars of budget freed up. And so higher propensity to consume, higher need because people were home more, and higher prices for materials. The 17% year over year growth in the market's actually pretty modest compared to what I'd say it's a pretty conservative estimate. We're not I think overinflating anything.
Okay. And on the consumer side, is that obviously it's the homeowner, but what about the commercial side? Do you guys deal with that at all as far as, the multi-family unit owners that are looking for services, regular services? Do you align them with things like that? Or are you working strictly with just your single unit owner?
Sure. Yeah. We've got, certainly there are multifamily unit owners who use their property managers who use the service. There are commercial businesses that use the service. We're predominantly existing residential, probably predominantly there are going to be people living in townhouses and single family houses, but there's every type of usage is probably represented on the platform, including both commercial and people, who just want to solve that pain point because they're managing multiple properties and they can use an app to book and manage jobs and services and that sort of thing.
Okay. So you guys offer a little bit of everything for pretty much everybody then.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to think we really cover the market, and it's a complicated market, but it's a growing business.
Yeah, very much so. So something that you kind of touched on there a little bit, and something I've talked a lot about is that obviously what we've just come through with this pandemic, and I've said it before on several of my shows that this pandemic really reinvigorated the value of the home. The home was no longer a place to eat and no longer a place to sleep. Yes, you did those things, but the home became so much more. It became the classroom, it became the office, it became the gymnasium, it became the place you raised your family. Now, everything that I had noticed that was just observations I saw from the field and from talking to people throughout the industry. But you guys actually did a lot of data and research on that. And one of the articles you put out was the economy of everything home that you released earlier this year. So I want to talk a little bit about that. What were you guys seeing in the field? What kind of effects did the pandemic have on the value of the home and what the home is to the homeowner?
It like you said, it changed everything. It got rid of the headwinds and it just supercharged the tailwinds. But it depends on the stage of life that people are in, and that's obviously one of the things that impacted it. But no matter what the stage of life people were in, it increased the usage. So the first thing we did when we were sort of looking at consumers and sort of what happened was we said, did you spend more time at home? And anecdotally, we repeat these things, but is anybody putting an actual number on it, right? Because you need an actual number in order to predict what's going to happen to spending, building materials, scarcity, all those sorts of things. And it was a 90+% more time at home for people. There's a small subset that spent less time at home, but we're talking about 90% of the national population saying they spent more time at home, and that's hundreds of millions of people. And so when you spend more time at home, that does a couple of things. The first is it increases wear and tear, right? You got more people using the systems. Housing systems are getting more complex, which means there's more, fail points. There's more things to break, and so that was just one piece of it. More time at home, more wear and tear, but also more time at home, more things you needed to do. So we specifically asked people, did you have more childcare needs? How much, what percentage of the population was actually spending more time at home with their kids? What percentage of the population was actually using their homes as home gyms? And it varies a lot, right? If you're asking, when we're looking at 60 to 80-year-olds, they're not using their homes really as home gyms. But when you're looking at 30-something professionals, you see, in that research we put out, very, very high percentages of people saying, yeah, we did that. What's going to happen? They're all going to spend money to try and make those spaces work better. And that's what we've seen. That's why, anybody who tried to buy workout equipment couldn't for a good chunk of the pandemic, because you have tens of millions of people who are all out there buying it. One of these quirky things, I don't know if you might have listeners who work in like farm equipment supply, and horse mats. You couldn't get horse mats because people were using them for home gym flooring. And so you get these weird responses like that. But when you actually look at what people are doing, it makes total sense, because you suddenly added tens of millions of new consumers to a product line that wasn't there before. And so there was that big component. But the other thing that happened was, when you're spending more time at home, the value per dollar that you get out of it in terms of enjoyment, right? So if you were, for every dollar, this is the way economists tend to think about things, but if you have a dollar that you're going to spend, you get some level of utility, some level of enjoyment out of that dollar. If you're at home more, you get more of that utility and enjoyment. So it makes the dollar effectively cheaper in your mind. And that's why you saw a higher willingness to spend on lots of projects, because maybe that $12,000-$14,000 bathroom remodel previously felt a little bit too much. You were being a little profligate. But if you're using that bathroom 6 times more than you were before, suddenly it's effectively much, much cheaper on sort of a per usage basis. And that might not be the way that consumers overtly think about things, but if you look at consumer behavior, that is how they tend to behave. And so that sort of really changed it. And I think that was one of the biggest effects, besides sort of the macro things like interest rates making money cheaper and that sort of thing too.
Sure. So you guys are just kind of watching the trends, watching the dollars, watching where they're spending, and that's how you're coming up with your realization of whether the value is based off of where they're placing their dollar.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
One of the things I saw in that report is you guys had a graphing of home ownership rate. Now, it looked like in that graph, it went back to somewhere mid 60s, maybe 65 is when that graph started. I'm assuming that's maybe where the tracking of that started. But what I noticed in that graph is that 2020 was the second highest ranked year on that entire graph. So what can you tell us about that?
So that's one of those things where it was both the trend in behavior, but also one has to be very careful in sort of your interpretation of how things are measured statistically. So the way things are measured statistically is we look at households that own the thing they live in. But household is a very specific definition. And a household is one through any number of people that are a cohabitating unit, not necessarily a legal family, but quite frequently a family, that all live in the same structure together. And what happened was initially people sort of moved back home. You had a lot of vacating of rental properties, and that juiced that number way up. It came back down, but it didn't come back down to what it was beforehand. So the pandemic briefly caused sort of a weird quirk in the way it's measured. But if you look overall, the takeaway from that chart is that we've been under the home ownership rate, the historical one, for quite some time, sort of post-Great Recession, so 2009 onward. We have not been anywhere near what we're supposed to be at because so many people got wiped out. But now we've got a new generation of people who are hitting that peak home buying age, and that's driving it back up. And so that, to me, is sort of the big story, is we accelerated the recovery, and the combination of that acceleration plus this newfound flexible living arrangements where people can say, hey, I might not have to move for my next job. I can actually just choose the place where I want to live and then stay there. I think just civically on sort of a level of, Americans sort of being happy with where they live, I think that's a great thing, right? Because it can maybe mean we reinvigorate local communities in a way that hasn't happened when we've got people moving around a lot for professional reasons. Now, if people can sort of just put down their roots, change jobs, but not have to change houses, I think that's a great thing for sort of a local level. But it's also a good thing that the homeownership rate is recovering to what it was before the Great Recession. And, hopefully we'll hit a newfound long-term historical high.
So, and that's something I've said before on my shows, that this is one of the big drivers of kind of what is pushing this supply and demand market. That is one of the differentiations that I have felt that is different about this market than what it was back during the housing boom, is that there truly is a massive demand right now for that home ownership. And I think you're seeing a lot of people realizing, based off of what has just happened in the last year, how much value there is to having a home, to owning a home, possessing that. And I think especially, when you start to look at these big groups like your millennials, they are starting families now. They're moving out of those coexisting habitats, and now they're looking for that home, that starter home or that first home, or maybe some are looking on their second, but they're having families, they're having kids. Now they need their own place. Are you guys seeing that in the data to support that?
100%, yes. And so there's a couple things going on. One is the oldest millennials are turning 40 this year, so we're not talking 23-year-olds in skinny jeans and avocado toast. I mean, maybe they're doing that, but they're in their 40s now, and so people are
you got some against avocado toast,
right? You can, no judgment here, but we're hitting that stage where people are certainly having kids, they're having families. People had them later because there was a big economic shock in the 2000s, right? So people were, the older millennials were sort of hitting that sort of early career stage, and then just everything was wiped out economy-wide. So people sort of had a delayed development there, but certainly it's still a want that a lot of people have. So they're hitting that stage. But the other thing, the biggest thing in terms of, needing space and all these other sorts of things is the money got really cheap, right? Interest rates went from you can average about 4.5% before the pandemic. Now you can still get a 30-year mortgage for 2.8, 2.9%. So if you're talking about a 33% reduction in the cost of owning the money to own the home, the rational thing is to go out there and buy houses, right? I mean, it makes it effectively cheaper. And so people did that. And that's the other reason why we've seen a big boom. And that has a couple of effects. One is it drives up the demand for new home construction because home builders can sell homes to people who are mortgaging it with cheaper money. But it's also means people are buying up cheaper houses, or previously houses that needed more work, because the new homes have gotten more expensive because consumers are bidding up the prices. And as a result, consumers who are bidded out of affording a new home have to go out there and buy something that's a fixer-upper. And, that's great for remodelers because it means people are getting into homes that need more work rather than a new construction. So, I don't know what percentage of your audience is sort of specifically focusing on remodeling, but I think it's going to be a really good couple of years for remodelers because people are getting into homes that they don't know what's wrong with them, what's behind the walls. They're going to want to update those things. And most people don't have the time, the tools, or the talent to go in and fix all that stuff up themselves. So I think it's going to be a really good couple of years for remodelers.
Yeah, and I'm glad you opened that can of worms because obviously this pandemic, as we said, it really did invigorate the housing market for the short term, but then also for the foreseeable long term for the future. But since we're talking about the remodeling, you also recently released an article that was how did remodeling prices change in 2020? So why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the prices shot up. There was a lot of price inflation, and we might even put something out to just look at how prices changed this summer because what you're talking about was a little bit before the summer, but they've continued to go up. So we will certainly do sort of our 21 retrospective towards the end of the year, but we might even do something before then just to sort of capture what the overall effect has been. And, we're talking about inflation rates well above, if we're talking about, the Fed's target rate of, 2-3%, we're way above that in terms of what people are paying for things. Now, not all of that is pure inflation. Some of it is just the change of the price. And this is the really tricky thing about, in particular, homes that are newly constructed, but even more so things like remodels, because it's pretty straightforward to price or to know if there's been price inflation in, let's say, a 2x4, right? Which is you've got an SPF 2x4, did it change in price? But you're controlling everything else. Everything else is staying constant. But if you're sitting there trying to say, well, did kitchen remodel prices go up? It's really hard because you've got to suss out, well, how much of that was the price of that amount of tile, that amount of labor, that amount of cabinetry, that amount of appliances, versus how much of that price is consumers willing to spend more on higher premium things. And so we break out some of that where we're sort of specifically trying to say, yes, prices went up, but consumers were also willing to spend on nicer things, right? And this is one of the side effects we saw, for example, with the tariffs on, certain Chinese-made goods. If those prices go up, for a consumer, you could say, well, I could pay 25% more for that same thing because of the tariff, or I could substitute out for something that used to cost 30% more, but now it only costs 5% more, but it's nicer. And so, we've seen a certain amount of substitution that's taken place as well.
Okay. Now, what are some of the sectors of the remodel industry? I know you mentioned several there, kitchen, things like that. Are there some that are taking bigger hits than others, or maybe getting a little bit more pressure as far as remodeling projects that are a little more popular than others right now?
Bathrooms were the big sort of hero in terms of the big top line remodeling projects. Bathrooms were just sort of universally popular. People chased those down.
Now, was that pandemic related, or is that just in traditionally that just seems to be one of the more popular remodels you see?
Both. The pandemic certainly
Okay.
provided some juice there, but they were also pretty popular because they're sort of pretty good value improvement. But the pandemic changed it a lot because people were using them more. People wanted to feel that sense of cleanliness. The pandemic was stressful for a lot of consumers that have the money to put in sort of more spa-like features and sort of spend that relaxation level of component. But the things where we sort of see a big impact are things like additions and those sort of more material intensive remodels. Obviously, those are going to be hit a lot more because if we're talking about being able to build an addition for a house, which that was a big project here for those. But what does an addition require? It requires a lot of SPF and it requires a lot of OSB. And both those things, you're dealing with stuff, so you've seen your own prices go up. But it requires a lot of that material. And then there's these dynamics that a lot of people don't. I mean, this again, I'm sure is not new for you, but for a lot of people, they don't appreciate this dynamic where, because of the nature of the market, it doesn't behave exactly like the way we tend to think about markets behaving. So we tend to think about markets behaving as in prices go up, consumers buy a little less, but people are like the textbook story is if prices go up, suppliers want to provide more of it. But that's not how it works in some of these building materials cases. So for example, I spoke to a number of cedar dealers, right? Just calling around, what's going on in the cedar markets, right? Because we try and back up the big data we're seeing with, individual observations. And lots of cedar dealers, they just stopped stocking it. They said, I don't want to be stuck holding the bag, buying at this price from the mill. If the market price drops, like that would wipe me out for the month. So I'm just not going to stock it because the price went up too much. And that's not something that people are, that's a dynamic that most people aren't accustomed to seeing. Normally you think, oh, the price is going to go up. The cedar dealer's going to want to carry more cedar because they're selling it, they're getting more money on margin.
Brings in a higher revenue. Yeah.
Right. But Lot said, nope, we're just not going to stock it because, the market price tripled. And if the market price drops, but I can't clear out my minimum inventory buy from the mill, I'm stuck holding all this above market cedar that I bought above market, and then the prices come down. So, that is.
So to them, the risk was greater than the reward.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so, that's one of these dynamics that, because of just this unique nature of the industry, we're not, it's not an industry where we're selling, stuff that's all made in a uniform factory and has, it's all consolidated. It's a very unique industry. And, part of the beauty and the romance of the industry, I think in my mind, is that it is this small, lots of small operators, but it is certainly that it produces these sorts of complications.
Okay. Now, one other factor that we really didn't talk a whole lot about on the remodeling side, how much of the remodeling market was driven because of lack of available homes for those that said, okay, we need this bigger home. We need more space. We're at the home more. We just got to get a bigger home and we can't find one. So how much of that remodeling, whether it had been, at finishing basements, doing additions, how much of that market was driven because of that factor?
That's a great question. I don't have a precise sort of percentage figure. My gut instinct is going to be around a third. And the reason why it's not more is because a good amount of the market was just driven by cash flow. So when interest rates dropped, tens of millions of households suddenly went, hey, I can refinance my mortgage and maybe get money, really cheap money back out if they're doing a cash out refi, or B, they're just noticing themselves positive cash flow, right? Their mortgage payment went down. It's a couple $100 extra a month, a couple $1,000 a year. And so that served as this big boost for remodeling anyway. The other thing was what we were talking about earlier with the overall change in how people were spending their household dollars. They weren't spending them on plane tickets and restaurants. So that also was just, let's throw it in the remodel. And then the other thing is the home equity effect. Because existing homeowners, they were expecting a certain amount of price appreciation. We all tend to. But people who weren't expecting it, which is most homeowners, suddenly saw this big jump, right? I mean, home prices are up. If you look at the Case-Shiller index, which tries to control for quality, so it really is a true price appreciation measure, we're talking 10 to 20% in most major metros. So if you suddenly saw 3 or 4 times the equity appreciation that the equity appreciation you were expecting in the next 5 years, you got in one, suddenly you're feeling wealthy. And so all of these other things are competing. So not being able to get into a house certain that you wanted and having to do a fixer-up or a finished basement, get more space, that certainly was a big effect. But there were so many other things going on and that are continuing to go on that it probably wasn't the majority of what we saw. It was all these other things too. All that home equity, the cash flow, the refis, all that stuff also really helped boost the market.
Okay. Do you have just out of curiosity, do you have a number for how much remodeling was increased last year in 2020 compared to typical years?
It's pretty consistent with our report. So about 17% was the year-over-year increase. Okay. And we'll need to sort of finish the year this year to sort of break out the seasonal effects and see really how things change. But I'm guessing we'll see a couple of years of 15 to 20%. That's sort of my hunch of what we'll sort of see as a persistent multi-year trend coming about from the pandemic and the drop in interest rates.
Okay. So you said we'll see a couple of years of that. And where is that? How does that compare to a typical year? How does it compare to, 2015, 2014, 2016? What kind of percentages were we seeing there?
So that's a good question because I don't have my own sort of numbers looking at it in those prior years. So There are some other estimates out there that sort of say it was sort of 3 to 6%. Those aren't necessarily entirely an apples to apples comparison because I only joined the company 2 years ago and started sort of diving in and generating these numbers and trying to produce these estimates. So before that, we're not making a perfect comparison, but 3 to 5% was probably the rough consensus among some of those other estimates that are out there.
Okay, so pretty significant increase then.
Yes, yeah, and that's why there's people talk about the shortages being in part mills being shut down because of the supply chains because of COVID issues, but the demand effect is a big part of it. It's not just that it's harder to get a container and the trucking rates have gone up. It's also that people just want more of this stuff.
Yeah. And, that brings up another topic, which is a very passionate topic for me. It's something I've talked about a lot on this show, and that is the industry personnel. I feel that this industry is a great industry. We have a lot of tenure in it. We've got a lot of people that have committed to it for the long haul, that have been in it for decades. And one of the downsides I see, though, is that, yeah, we're losing a lot. A lot of those people are retiring, which is understandable, but we don't have a lot of young people coming into this. And I think a lot of that's to blame on ourselves. I don't think we've done a great job at selling this industry, how much opportunity there's, how great this industry really is. But again, these are kind of observations that I see in the field, that I hear from talking to people. You guys have actually done some more research and more data on this. What are you guys seeing there in the numbers?
We're seeing a lot of concern about that shortage, and I do think it's a true shortage. This is a harder question than people sometimes realize in order to answer. Is there a shortage of something? Because there's a joke among economists that there's a shortage of Mercedes-Benz because I can't buy one for $10,000, right? Like that's not a true shortage. It's just I'm not willing to pay what they cost. And so some people would say, well, that's the problem that the trades have. They're just not willing to pay what would require to attract people to it. And, I'm sure that there's a few sort of small micro markets where that's the case. But by and large, I think it's a true shortage because we've culturally stressed other things, I think, to our detriment. And, even as somebody who moonlights as a university instructor, I think we've oversold university as a pathway for everybody. There's certainly some majors that don't pan out and that aren't a very good deal economically and that people shouldn't pursue. There are certain things that universities are wonderful for, but it's not this uniform thing. And, culturally, if we don't prioritize things, people will not make necessarily a pure rationally economic argument, which is the wages argument, because there's lots of trades that pay way more than the median wage in a lot of areas, and people don't pursue the jobs. And why is that? I mean, that's a more of a cultural norm than it is that the wages have to go up. And yes, if you raise the wages to $1 million an hour, people would join in, but that's not realistic. But certainly when you're saying this person can get a pay bump going over and doing this work, the people who do that work really like it. They're not making the move. Why is that? And that's because of these sort of cultural factors. And I think that we're starting to change a little bit. There's some great people on social media and various platforms that are sort of, I think, helping make the trades cool again and, making these points. Certainly Mike Rowe has been famous for this for quite some time, trying to really highlight the romance of that. One of the things that we really narrowed down on is highlighting the disconnect where we ask people, how are you recruiting to the skilled trades? And they say, well, we're offering wages and, above average wages and maybe some signing bonuses or whatever. But we ask people, why do you like your work? Overwhelmingly, people say yes. Extremely high job satisfaction in the skilled trades. People really like the work. And we ask them, why do you like the work? Is it the wages? And they say, no, it's the meaning and the value in the work. That's what I really like. And then we say, well, are you recruiting on that? No. So there's this total disconnect. So there's room to improve. There's also room to improve demographically, right? The trades are overwhelmingly male. Women who do the work like the work. When we ask people, would creating a clearer pathway for women get more women in the trades? Companies with a lot of women say, yes, this would help. Companies without any women say, no, it wouldn't help. So there's sort of a certain degree of inertia that's just taking place there. And that's true with, demographic representation too, in terms of, pulling other demographic groups into the trades. And that's part of it. And then the other thing is the ages, right? When we ask people, how are you recruiting? It's overwhelmingly word of mouth. But if your average tradesperson's 45 or 50 and you're trying to pull 19-year-olds in, I don't think your word of mouth system is going to work very well unless you're, streaming video games on YouTube, right? I mean, that's where your audience is, but that's not who most people are talking to. So you've got to get beyond the word of mouth thing. And really, I mean, I've got some very practical advice for listeners that run businesses, and that is, in addition to trying to recruit on wages, recruit on, also the enjoyment, but also on career advancement. The younger generations, they want a clear pathway. And that's one of the strengths of universities is you do your 1, 2, 3, 4 years, and then you get this credential. And there's room for more companies to sort of do some degree of that, saying, here's your pathway, you join here. This is sort of like your gamified approach to pulling people in and retaining them too, right? Because once you get somebody good, you want to retain them. You don't want to lose them to a competitor. And so if you give people that career sort of pathway, that sense of ownership, that sense of satisfaction. I think that is sort of the big thing that people have to do. But we're actually putting out some fresh research on that for numbers this year, and it's getting worse, right? Most people sort of say it's getting worse. By polling, the number of people who think it's a problem has risen. So it's sort of an accurate predictor. And yeah, there's not enough people in it. And you can make great money in the trades. You can start doing it right away. You don't have all that lost time when you are in school, not earning any money. You don't have any student loan debt. I mean, it's a really compelling career choice. And people enjoy it too, right? Like, for a living, I program statistical models on computers, but that's not what I do on the weekend. On the weekend, I do woodworking and building things. I don't know a lot of builders that on the weekend decide to sit in front of a computer, right? One's a lot more fun than the other.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think that is kind of another silver lining of this pandemic is that I think it really has put our industry in the spotlight a little bit, just because of all the shortages, just because of from homes to the labor side, and I think it has helped drive the prices up, which in return, and I agree with 100%, it's not about the wages, but I think it does help a little bit, but it really has put a little focus on our industry. And I think people are starting to notice this a little bit more. I think people are saying, yeah, they're maybe encouraging their kids to look at some of these things. Wow, you know what? I can't find, I need these projects done, or I want to get a home built, and there's not a lot of people doing it. Hey, have you thought about doing this? You like working with your hands. You like building things. And I think that really is kind of helping our industry along. Hopefully we can harness that momentum and continue to ride that wave and really take it to the next level. Because I think that, like you said, I mean, we're all struggling. And let's face it, this was deemed an essential industry for a reason, because you have to have a roof over your heads. You have to have a home.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is something that just shows the longevity of what we offer and what we can do. And I think people will find that it's a great career path. I mean, it really is. I mean, that's something that people are always going to need. They're always going to need shelter.
Right. Yeah, and that's so true. And there is a unique time, and people shouldn't squander it. Right? People should really focus on saying, "Hey, I've got this unique moment right now to pull people in." We're talking about student loan debt. We're talking about the needs. We're talking about the boom, and we're going to have a boom couple of years. And we're talking about all those things. So don't squander it. Don't be afraid to scale up. I think a lot of people are still walking around feeling burned from the Great Recession, from that implosion. But right now, the boom is completely different, right? We're not talking about a boom because people who already own 5 over-leveraged houses were buying their 6th one with no money down and a variable rate mortgage, right? I mean, that's not what's going on right now.
Oh, I know. That was a disaster.
Right. It was a total disaster. And it was a predictable disaster, too.
It was. You could see it financially coming. It was just, it was poor lending on the financial institutes. I mean, you could see that coming from a mile away.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's not what this is. I don't think people need to feel worried about, hiring another 3 people because everything's going to implode and they'll have to lay everybody off in a year. I think that now's the time to be bold, improve your business, try and gain share, try and deliver new services to whether your customer is another business or a builder or whether it's the end consumer, whatever it is. Try and focus on, feeling optimistic and the strategy involved and leveraging that and recruiting people, right? I mean, people are the younger millennials and the Gen Zs, they want work that they like. That's one generational shift that we've really sort of seen is people want work that has meaning and value. They don't want to do work that is seen as useless to society. And there's not something, you'd be hard pressed to find something more essential and a thing that you can be less proud of than working to build things for people, whether that's a space that they like more with an existing sort of house or whether it's new construction, whatever it is. I mean, these are things that are really sort of essential to a happy human life. And, that's a lot more compelling than going in and, helping optimize, ads that people click on or something, right? I mean, it's very rewarding work.
Yeah. For those that are in this industry, I mean, this is a great time to be in it. It's a great industry. You already know that, but it's a great time to be in it. And for those that are thinking about this industry, it's also a great time to get into it. So I think if we all are out there, selling that message, if we're all out there, like you said, let's sell the advantage. Don't just sell the wages. Let's sell, our passion. Let's sell what we do. Let's sell that we enjoy it, because that's why so many of the people that are in it have been in it for so long. I think if we're all raising that tide, all the ships will raise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So true. Unique time.
Misha, I want to be respectful of your time. If people want to find out more, what's the best way to do that?
I think the best way to do that, if you want to follow the market dynamics and these sorts of things that we've been talking about, we have a public facing research portal. So, the company Angie, they brought me on board to make this stuff public to everybody and to put out good numbers. So if people want to just stay abreast of what's going on in the market, or they want to suggest things to study, they think that hey, this is an interesting angle. Have you done anything there? We're obviously open to what people in the industry are concerned about. They can go to angi.com/research. So ANGI.com/research. And that is a spot to see the latest that we've put out, to sign up, or there's a contact form as well, and they can send advice there. They can just sign up for things. And people can also track me down on LinkedIn or Twitter, any of those venues too.
And do you have any closing thoughts for the listeners?
I think for the listeners, it's a great time to be in the industry, probably the most unique time in 100 years. There's a few inflection points that we've had, maybe, post Second World War, the lead up to the housing crisis and the housing crisis. Not all these inflections are good points, but just in terms of really standout historical moments, this is one of those. It's a great time. There's a few $1 trillion in new household home equity that was just created with existing homeowners. There's a whole generation of people that are coming into their first time homes. There's a growing focus on sort of happiness and health and home design. These are all things that are much more culturally prominent than they used to be. And, we've hit a point where people are concerned about student loan debt and over leveraging themselves and all of these things. This is a really unique time for the industry, and people should be cognizant of it, that this is a very, very unique inflection point, and try and be strategic. Try and really, be very intentional about what your business is doing and how it's growing and what you want to accomplish. And, don't rest on your laurels, but also don't be pessimistic.
Misha, I want to thank you for everything you do for the industry and then for taking the time to share with us this evening.
Thank you. It was wonderful to be with you.
This is the Building the Future podcast. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe. Please like and share. You can find out more at our website, www.buildingthefuturepodcast.com. Together we are building the future.